All right, moving over to the middleweight division now. We got Roman Dolidze coming in at plus 350, going up against Christian Leroy Duncan, who comes in at minus 450. Now, Dolidze is coming off of a absolute beatdown, courtesy of Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who kept Dolidze on the back foot, kept taking him down, Matt returning, threatening with submissions, and then eventually in the fourth round got that nasty rear naked choke. It was like I think Dolidze was on his knees and Anthony Smith was kind of just on his back standing and just slapped on that choke and squeezed as hard as he could, and Dolidze was forced to tap. And that just kind of shows, like, Dolidze is normally the more aggressive, a gritty fighter in the cage. But when he's fighting a guy that's grittier than him, that can handle his aggression, that's where he ends up coming up short. He had a 4-fight winning streak, which was he was trying to match his 4-fight winning streak as he went into that fight with Anthony Hernandez. But again, very, very tough stylistic matchup for him. He's one of those guys that relies on his just toughness and warrior mentality to make up for some of his technical shortcomings. I think he is an accredited BJJ brown belt, maybe black belt, but you don't really see that fully on display. He can beat the Anthony Smiths and he can force Kevin Holland to quit and even outdamage Marvin Vettori, who, really struggles to get off on big damage in his fights. But he will come up short against the Nasruddin Imovovs and Anthony Hernandez's because of his inability to land legitimate technical shots and only relying on that pace and pressure that he brings to the table. I don't think he's that great. He's kind of been the joke of the MMA betting community when he first came into the game. And I think even, myself, a lot of other people are surprised that he's managed to get to a point where he was headlining a few fight night cards and even fighting some of the top guys in the middleweight division. But we're seeing over the last couple of fights, he will come up short against the guys that actually deserve to be fighting for titles. Now he's going up against Christian Leroy Duncan, who had an absolutely spectacular performance against Marco Tulio last time around. I was surprised that we were able to get Tulio, as the underdog that night. I think a lot of people were buying into the hype of Tulio, but I think that's the benefit of like watching Cage Warriors, watching LFA, breaking these guys down even on the regional scene. So once they make it to the UFC, maybe some people will make them out to be better than they actually are. But Tulio only had wins over Trishan Gore and Ihor Potieria, and he found himself as a big favorite or a somewhat of a favorite against Christian Leroy Duncan. I just knew something was off at that point. Duncan obviously fell short in a few of his UFC fights as well, specifically that Gregory Rodriguez fight. But at his best, he's nasty. He's getting more comfortable in the clinch game, which helps him slow his opponents down. And then from there, he can, spring flashy, big techniques on his opponents and get them out of there, like he did against Eric Anders and like he did against Marco Tulio. And he's very much rounded out his game from just being this headhunter. On the regional scene for Cage Warriors, he was always dealing with guys that would constantly look to take him to the ground, but his takedown defense was good enough that he was able to keep them out. And then his opponents kind of just gassed out and he was able to land big shots and get them out of there that way. Now he's the one kind of applying pressure in the clinch, landing some dirty boxing, landing some knees, and then letting go with big strikes when his opponents start to slow down. So I love that about his game. I love that he's maturing as a fighter because he is a guy, if he can just dial everything in correctly, who's to say he can't be in title contention? He has that style. He has the knockout ability. He has the takedown defense. It's all about locking in mentally for him to go out there and actually get these wins. Now, when I studied this matchup late last week, he was roughly around minus 300, I think it was, minus 315. Now he's all the way up at minus 450. So it kind of just goes to show, people are low on him going up against Marco Tulio. Now they're just all over him against Roman Dolidze. I will say this. I'd probably take Dolidze over Tulio. I think Tulio's good, but I think he's more flash than substance. And I think Dolidze's style would cause Tulio some issues, especially with how often Dolidze moves forward and tries to, just command the cage and dictate the pace of fights. And I think Tulio would break under that. But in this matchup, I think Duncan, if he finds himself getting backed up by Dolidze, I think we'll see Duncan engage in the clinch, start to wear on Dolidze with his strength and his power. But I think Duncan will often be able to land big shots here, and I think he'll be able to find the knockout. With that said, I think this line is just a little bit too wide because if there is any inkling of that potential mental break with Duncan, a guy like Dolidze can expose that. Especially if Dolidze continues to move forward. If he eats some of Duncan's best shots and he's still there, Duncan could absolutely break mentally and start allowing Dolidze to dictate the pace of this fight. So I wouldn't really trust Duncan at minus 450. I think he wins this fight. I think he gets the knockout. But I'm going to rein in my confidence a little bit here because Dolidze is known to pull off even wackier shit than potentially springing the upset here. So I'm going to go Duncan by knockout, but just be a little bit skeptical about what Dolidze could potentially do to Duncan here.